Hey guys, I'm Mountain River Fiber, and in this video I'm going to be sharing with you how I made a late 18th century French quilted corset based on an extant garment from the Museon Arletan in France. So for those of you who don't know, corsets in the late 18th century in France were soft and unboned. Early corsets could be quilted, often quite elaborately, and either laced or tied in the front. In England, a similar garment during this period was called a pair of jumps, and these really gained popularity starting in the late 17th century, although according to what I've read, they seem to have died down a little in popularity by the middle of the 18th century, but these were also soft, unboned, quilted garments. Of course, the most common and the most respectable undergarment during this period was a pair of bone stays, or half-boned stays. But women could and did wear pairs of jumps or corsets around the house, or if they needed more freedom of movement while working outside. It really doesn't look like there's a ton of difference between early corsets and jumps, so even though it's a little confusing, I'm gonna keep calling this garment a corset, because that is the French word, and of course what I'm recreating is from France. So the reason that I decided to make this particular garment is because I want to have some kind of period appropriate structure or support garment underneath the late 18th, early 19th century half robe that I'm going to be making next, based on the pattern by Janet Arnold in Patterns of Fashion 1, and that is the half robe from 1795 to 1800 from Snow's Hill Manor. I'm really inspired by the idea of history bounding. Morgan Donner has a really awesome video about that, which I will also link down below, because I don't have the time, the money, the energy, or the closet space. In fact, I don't even have closets to be making garments I can only wear occasionally at an event. I want to be able to wear historically inspired garments every day. My goal is to make these as accurately as possible, and that involves using original patterns or basing things on extant garments, using a blend of machine sewing and more historical sewing techniques, and also having appropriate underpinning. So I really wanted something that would fulfill all those requirements, but still be comfortable enough for me to go about my daily life. And I contemplated making a pair of boned or half-boned stays, but I know exactly what I would have been wearing during the late 18th century, and it would have been a soft, unboned corset. Plus I love quilting, so I'm really excited for this project, and I hope you guys enjoy the process. This is the front of the corset I'll be recreating, and then this is the back. So to start off, I did two technical drawings of the garment based on those images, and this was just to familiarize myself with the general proportions of the original garment, as well as the different pieces it's comprised of, and any irregularities in its construction, as far as I could tell. Next, I increased the size of the image until 1 centimeter on the scale bar equaled 1 inch on my ruler. Then I took a series of measurements and made a series of conversions in order to get the dimensions of the original garment. I then discovered that it was actually basically my size, aside from the bust measurements, which were just slightly too small, so that made it very easy to draw out an approximation of what the pattern pieces should look like, get the measurements for those, and then draft up a really rough draft pattern. This is really basic mock-up number 1. And as you can see, I have basically just cut out the outline of what I think the pattern is. There we go. And I have pinned these straps, starting in the back, and then I reached forward and pinned here in the front. What I'm realizing is it's too tight up here. And I think this is because in the original, the back panel right here is actually added to the body and back piece. So I think it's like the back seam is cut straight and then split at the top, and then there's extra fabric on the arm size. So that's what I'm thinking. I'm gonna go ahead and cut out another one because I want it to be as tight down here, but I don't want it to be as tight up here. So here I am just splitting that back seam so that I can insert the polygon of interest and pinning it in place so that I can do another fitting. Round 2, I have, let's see, I cut the back, I added the sort of strange polygon and pinned it all together, and then I noticed there was a ton of gapping here in the center back, which of course would have been solved in the original garment by that seam running through the center back. So I realized, oh, that's perfect, I can just take some in, so I just tucked it a little bit, which really does solve the problem. The only sort of last problem we have really is this gaping here at the back of the arm side, and I think that's from joining the point of this back piece to the center back like a little too high. I think if I just sort of join it down here instead of up here, it'll not gap as much. So I'm gonna go ahead and try that. Alright, so this is, I think, as good as I'm gonna get it. I have repinned and repinned and repinned. I wanted the straps to be just a little further out as they are right now, and I also figured out how to get the back to lay smoother. So let me see if I can show you. So with my initial fittings completed, I traced out the alterations I had made to the mock-up, so I knew where to cut my pattern pieces. I also made sure to mark the length of the shoulder straps, which was especially important since I decided not to cut the shoulder straps as one with the body, but instead to attach them separately. Then I unpinned and trimmed off excess muslin from each of the pieces. Cut down the center back seam, and clipped the tuck at the bottom. Next, I traced out my muslin onto more muslin, and you can tell it's serious this time because I'm using a ruler, and this will serve as my pattern piece. I traced the whole thing out, and then I added seam allowance, although I didn't add seam allowance evenly around the entire pattern piece, so I had to make that up later while I was cutting out the piece in the actual fabric, which was a hassle. So note to self, don't do that again. After all that sitting hunched over my workstation, I decided to take a safe, socially distant walk. Now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be testing how much this fabric will be shrinking, both in the wash and also when it's been quilted. So right now I have a little 3" by 3" sandwich of the linen upper, the cotton batting, and a linen rayon blend for the lining. And I'm going to quilt it in what I think is the right design. This is the extant garment here. It looks like it's a diamond pattern. I'm not entirely sure about that. It is kind of hard to see. It looks like some of the stitches have fallen out, but I'm going to give that a try. And then I'm going to wash it in cold water, and I'm going to pop in the dryer briefly just to get sort of the maximum amount of shrinkage that could happen. Then when it's all dried, I'm going to measure it again. I'm sure it will be smaller than 3" by 3". I have quilted up my little 3-inch square. Don't look at how messy the stitches are. I said I liked quilting. I didn't say I was any good at it. I also switched thread colors halfway through. I can't quite find a good match for this sort of strange, like, navy blue and white fabric. I tried starting out with white thread, but I hate it, so I think I'm gonna go with the navy thread just because it looks a little less messy. Although this whole thing looks messy, so yeah. I'm gonna wash it now and then we'll see how that goes. Here is my little swatch. It's been washed in cold water and then dried in a dryer until totally dry, so about 40 minutes. And this is probably about as shrunk as it's gonna get, and as you can see, it is definitely no longer 3 inches by 3 inches. It is more like, yeah, it's more like 2.5 by 2.5, so it's lost 1/2 inch. Here I am tracing my pattern out onto my lining fabric. After the shrinkage test, I decided to just pre-shrink all of my fabric, including the cotton batting, just to be on the safe side. Next, I cut out all of the different pieces of the lining fabric. I assembled my lining pieces in order to create one final mock-up with which I could make any last-minute adjustments to the fit as needed. Although I didn't film the try-on process, the mock-up was mostly successful. I just had to do a couple of alterations with that back seam, particularly in terms of making the angle of it go in a little bit more, so taking it in just slightly at the bottom of the garment. But otherwise I'm very happy with it and no further adjustments were needed. Once I was confident I had everything pretty much figured out, I cut my fashion fabric and batting using the lining pieces as a guide. I chose to use the selvage of my fashion fabric as the bottom edge of the corset because I really liked those multicolored threads running through the selvage, and I thought it would be a nice detail on the interior hem of the finished garment. With all the fabric cut out, I just pinned together the layers so that they would stay in place while I was assembling the garment and then sewing it. Basically, I've just pinned the corset together and fastened it just to get an approximation of how big it is. Do all the pattern pieces work together? The answer is yes, that they do work together, and also it is slightly too big. So that's actually great because it gives me the opportunity to take in more here at the center front opening so that I can really reinforce the fastenings that I'm going to use. I have been trying to figure out how it was originally fastened. I'm not totally sure. Actually, there's no indication of eyelets, there's no hooks and eyes maybe, I'm not really sure. It's so hard to tell because they have no pictures of the inside of the garment, which is a real shame. And so I've looked at other similar garments, some of which do have pictures of the guts of them, and there's a possibility that it could have had hidden lacing, so on the interior of the corset, 2 strips, and then the front is maybe pinned together, but I'm not doing that. I'm going the simple route, which is spiral laced front until I actually get to see the garment in person, which I probably never will. I just won't know. I am, of course, really curious if any of you guys have any ideas about how it might have been fastened based on these pictures or based on other research. It's just beyond my knowledge and my capabilities right now to figure it out. So this is what I'm left with right now. I'm going to start figuring out the exact seam allowances and then I'm going to sew it all together.